Between 2003 and 2005, Oasis would attempt to record their 6th album 3 different times, in 3 different studios, with 3 different producers, in 2 different countries. In that era, they would also have 3 different drummers, they would fall out with and leave their record company, and at the end of it, they would produce what was, in my opinion, their best album of the noughties. Don't believe the truth. This is the story of the troubled making of that album. After releasing Standing on the Shoulder of Giants in 2000 and Heathen Chemistry in 2002, there was a sense among some that Oasis were now on a bit of a downtrend, that the Oasis hot air balloon was rapidly losing altitude. Their days of leading UK youth culture and selling out Nebworth were now long a thing of the past. Whether or not Oasis were still a force that could contend with the next generation seemed to hinge, in the eyes of the press, on whatever they did for their next album. And behind the scenes, I think there was a bit of panic on deck. I don't think the band knew how to turn things around. So the first thing they tried was to bring in some new producers. Heathen Chemistry was the first Oasis album ever made without a producer, the band just doing it themselves. But later on, Noel would confirm that he didn't want to be in that position again, which suggests that it really hadn't gone as well as he'd hoped. British duo Death in Vegas were therefore brought in to produce the new album in 2003. That year, 2003, was mostly a year off for Oasis, but the second major change came at the end of it in December, when long-standing drummer Alan White was fired. The next month, January 2004, they went to Sawmill Studio in Cornwall, with new session player Terry Kirkbride on board, and Death in Vegas behind the desk. And that studio was picked because of its significance and symbolism to Oasis, who were, at that time, trying to recapture the flame. They were chasing the edge and the vitality that they had on their first album, Definitely Maybe, which is why they had decided to go back to that studio, because that's where most of that album had been recorded. And they even tried to record the new album in exactly the same way, live in the studio, so all the band playing at the same time in the studio, rather than layering up the tracks one by one, as would be a bit more usual. Whatever it was that Noel Gallagher was looking for, however, he quickly realised that he wasn't finding it there in Sawmills. And after 2 or 3 weeks, the first full recording of their new album, which was fully recorded but never mixed, ended up being abandoned. You can check out my recent video on the lost Death in Vegas album for a deeper dive into that one.
It was a great concept, but it didn't quite work.
The reason why the sessions were scrapped, it wasn't anything to do with Richard or Tim. It's just looking back on it, we weren't really ready.
Attempt 1 had failed, so for attempt 2, Oasis went to Wheeler End, Noel Gallagher's studio at the time in Buckinghamshire, where they attempted to carry on making the album with Terry Kirkbride still on drums, I believe. And there's a well-known Oasis Easter egg that stems from, I believe, these sessions. At the end of the song Mucky Fingers, which ended up on the finished album, you can hear a psychedelic little acoustic moment right at the end that slowly fades out after the song is finished. What you're hearing there is the opening ambience to a future B-side called Those Swollen Hand Blues. It was actually the band's last ever proper B-side. If you put the 2 songs back to back, one transitions perfectly into the other, and I think that might have been in preparation for what was intended to be the first single from the new album, Mucky Fingers. Mucky Fingers would flow into the first B-side seamlessly. And I suspect there was meant to be some thematic connection there as well, which you can see just from those titles, Mucky Fingers into Swollen Hand Blues. And the reason I think that particular transition came from the second sessions, not the first sessions, is that apparently the Death in Vegas sessions were never even mixed. They just weren't there long enough. So it's my kind of semi-educated guess that it had to be in this second session that more complex things like that were done and songs like Lord Don't Slow Me Down were recorded. There is also a recently leaked segment of the Oasis version of a rare song called The Good Rebel, which has recently surfaced, and I also think that song came from these sessions. At Wheeler End, however, they were once again without a producer. They had kind of drifted back into exactly what they had been trying to get away from in the first place.
thank fuck we're in a position to go, bin that, it's not quite right, keep going, try some new ideas, come back here.
At that stage, Noel was pretty much producing it himself. But I think that was also a bit too much on his shoulders.
The Wheeler End sessions were more productive than the Death in Vegas sessions, but they still weren't quite right. And so I think that towards the end of them, Noel decided that the drums were part of what wasn't right. So Terry Kirkbride was honourably discharged and Zach Starkey brought in instead. The Wheeler End sessions had been, I think, for a couple of months from February 2004, culminating in June with a performance at Glastonbury. Oasis were headlining that year, and they played a set in which they debuted 2 new songs from the upcoming batch of new material, A Bell Will Ring and The Meaning of Soul. Interestingly, both of these were cut from subsequent rebroadcasts and are very hard to find online. However, the Oasis that took to the stage that night were really quite down and stuck in a rut, because shortly before playing Glastonbury, they had scrapped everything they had recorded at Wheeler End as well.
The easiest thing in the world, right, is go in the studio, record an album, put tickets on sale, sell 350,000 tickets in half an hour, and say, fuck, aren't we the bollocks? You know, put a record out and everyone go, well, you know, the record's shit, but it was still massive. But that's not what it's all about. It's about listening to something in 2 years' time and going, hey, it still fucking sounds good, you know?
We have a very strong work ethic. I think that's something that Noel's always had with his band.
The gig was not well received, and in an interview afterwards, a less than buoyant Noel Gallagher talked about the sessions so far. And presenter and friend of the band Joe Wiley seems to be keenly aware of what a pivotal time this is for Oasis, literally asking them if they've got the fire back in their bellies and reaffirming what everyone seemed to know, that this album had to be a good one.
But is the fire back in the belly, or whatever that phrase is at the moment, with you lot?
Well, I can only go by the 2 gigs that we've done, and it's been great. We've had a real problem with this album that we're trying to record because Zach's commitments and another guy that we used on the drums. We had 7 weeks of messing about, and one guy's played on some track and Zach's played on the other. It's just been a bit stop-start, but we had these 10 songs that we thought were great, and it was only going to work if we'd done them with Death in Vegas, and we were going to go away and we were going to record it in 7 days, and we were going to mix it in 10 days, and it was going to be out by now. Yeah. And as things progressed, the moment kind of passed on them back to songs, so now we've gone back to the drawing board, and it's just a case of re-recording it, really.
But it's got to be good this time, hasn't it? Absolutely.
It is going to be great.
In the NME, they were asked, "Did you feel Glastonbury was as bad as people said?" Liam responded, "People said I sang bad, but I can't see that happening because I never sing bad." The journalist said, "Scissor Sisters said you had no respect for the crowd." And Noel responded, "We don't. We've got no respect for any crowd, not even our own. You can put that in big black letters as well, because we've never had respect for any crowd. They can all suck my arse." However, despite the defiance here, I think this was actually a little bit of a crisis point for Liam Gallagher as well. Because May 2004, in the midst of all this mess, the report appeared in the NME that he was putting together a side project. Oasis frontman Liam Gallagher is forming his own supergroup featuring Stone Roses guitarist John Squire and late Beatle George Harrison's son Danny. The band are planning to start recording tracks later this year and expect to record an album for Christmas. So it kind of looks like, right in the middle of these fraught sessions for Oasis's 6th album, Liam was just discouraged and distracted and kind of wanted to just go and do something else. That particular supergroup and Christmas album never did materialise, but it just goes to show that Liam might have been wondering if this Oasis album was ever going to get finished. The band were now riding a massive losing streak, and they had capped it all off with a much criticised appearance, headlining the biggest festival in the country to scathing reviews. But it was at the lowest moments in the story when the turning point came, from the most unlikely source imaginable. In Hot Press 2001, a journalist said to Noel, "I understand you had a close encounter of the Marilyn Manson kind." Noel replied, "I was watching Eminem from the side of the stage when one of Manson's guitarists came over and went, 'Hey dude, it's great to meet you, man.' 10 minutes later, I get this tap on the shoulder, and there's Brian in his full staff sergeant's regalia. I was like, ooh, I'm going to be beheaded. But no, he ever so politely shook my hand and just said hello." I hadn't believed this journalist bloke a couple of years ago when he told me that Be Here Now is one of Marilyn Manson's favourite records. But yeah, it's true. Now I don't know for sure, but this encounter could have been at the Reading Festival that year, 2001, where Eminem and Marilyn Manson both performed. And I wonder if that guitarist was actually bass player Twiggy Ramirez, who became from that point on a friend of the band. We find out that Noel and him stayed in touch from a fairly obscure source, the liner notes to the Goal soundtrack. Released in 2005, this movie soundtrack contained 3 totally unique Oasis tracks. And, using the album credits, we can do a little bit of detective work. Because 2 of these songs were recorded at Snake Ranch Studios in London, and from that we can deduce something about when these tracks were recorded, because Snake Ranch closed in 2003. We see from the liner notes again that Terry Kirkbride was on drums for those 2 songs, which means Who Put the Weight of the World on My Shoulders and the Cast No Shadow re-record had to be recorded somewhere in 2003 during Oasis's year off. And so what I think those 2 particular tracks could be is Terry's audition to record with Oasis. And then look who we see on bass for Cast No Shadow. Twiggy Ramirez from Marilyn Manson, under his real name, Geordie White. With Marilyn Manson, Geordie had worked several times with an American producer called Dave Sardy, and I reckon it's very possible that it might have been Geordie who recommended Dave Sardy in the producer's chair. And that brings us on to the 3rd unique track on the Goal soundtrack, Morning Glory, the D Sardy mix. I genuinely think that just as Cast No Shadow could have been Terry Kirkbride's drum audition, this could have been part of Dave Sardy's audition to be their producer. I reckon they sent him the studio stems of a few old songs they'd recorded so he could mix them so they could hear his style, and I reckon this was one of them. And so, in the ongoing spirit of endless experimentation to get it right, the band ended up going to America to record.
So after a few weeks of being here, we realised we were going to have to get a real producer in.
Oasis called me about a year ago, initially just to mix a couple of tracks that they were working on, stuff that they had recorded up at their studio. We mixed a couple tracks, and then the band went, oh shit, this is great, this is fun, we should be there.
With Zach Starkey now behind the kit, they decamped to the States to make their 3rd and final attempt at making the album. And this time, at last, everything seemed to fall into place. Mojo says, eventually, after 7 months of honing and tickling, Oasis were taking their songs over the Atlantic to Capitol Studios in Los Angeles with a stowaway in the shape of Zach Starkey, Who drummer and genetic Beatle. Despite the band's antipathy to 6'4" American producers with beards, they were linking up with Dave Sardy. Talking about Dave's skills, Noel said he was also better at massaging Liam's ego, getting the right performance. Every time I say to Liam, you might want to try and back off on that, the words he hears in his head are, your 2 sons are lesbian Nazis. And so, in America, Dave Sardy turned out to be the missing jigsaw piece. He was able to keep the peace between the band, and he was able to pull together all the disparate pieces they had recorded in multiple studios to create something brilliant.
Every song on this record was recorded in at least 3 to 4 studios. You'll have like a guitar from England and a drum track from LA, a piano part done in New York, a vocal done in outside of London, and shakers done in the heart of London. I would say the entire album was recorded unorthodoxly. I mean, you hear these stories, growing up being interested in recordings and the Beatles, and the one that always fascinated me would be like Strawberry Fields, where you heard they had to combine all these different versions. You're like, what was going through their minds at the time? Well, I think I know now.
While they were there in LA, Paul McCartney also stopped by the studio while they were recording a song called Boy with the Blues that never actually made it onto an album.
How many Beatles did you meet? Did you meet George and Paul?
I met Paul, I've met Ringo. I met McCartney a few times, and he was mega as well, you know what I mean? He's top man. First time I met him was in LA, in Capitol Studios. Zach was playing with us, so he'd come in to see Zach. We had a photograph with him, and then we were doing some kind of bass. I think it was on one of my songs called The Boy with the Blues, and he was going, the bass, it's not that, it's not too great and all that. I was like, well, you're next door, why don't you go and get your bass and put it on there? And he was like, nah, he wriggled out of it, you know what I mean?
That song, when it was eventually released, however, curiously featured a completely unique drummer for Oasis, Jim Keltner. a man who played for the solo Beatles many different times down through the decades. So I wonder if he was there playing with McCartney and was just loaned out to Oasis for that one song they happened to be working on when McCartney was there.
You weren't there, but I understand when the band were recording the album at Capitol Studios in Los Angeles, Paul McCartney was in next door, wasn't he? Tell us the story.
Well, they flew out a week earlier than me.
This is the band, the rest of the band.
Because I'd got the flu after being on the road with Ian Brown, funnily enough, and so they went out a week early. So when I got there, it's Liam's. Hey, I never guessed he was in here the other day. Fucking McCartney. I'm going, really? Was he? He gets out this photograph, so there's Gem, Andy, Zach, Macca, and our Liam on the end, like that. And I'm going, you two-faced little fucker. And he's going, what? And I was like, you are on record as saying you were going to play golf off his head on fucking Primrose Hill. You called him a lesbian. You know what I mean? You loathe Paul McCartney, and there you are. Was that? We did an arm round him. Like that. I said, you two-faced twat. He was like, hey, he's a fucking geezer, McCartney. Well, I've never slagged off Paul McCartney. I was like, do you want me to go and get the press clippings?
But while the final version of the album was coming together nicely at last, in the background, things were becoming increasingly fraught between Noel Gallagher and Sony, his record label. In Mojo, Noel talked about one particularly difficult encounter he had with a representative from Epic, which is an arm of Sony in America. We go to a posh restaurant, recounts Noel. He's kind of asking, why can we not get this record done? And I'm telling him how it doesn't sound right and how I'm going to write more songs. And he says, you know who you sound like? Right now, just sitting there, just talking about your grievances and worried about the record. Do you know who you sound like? I go, who? And he says, Anastasia. As I was looking at him, I thought, you will never see my face again, and I will never lay eyes on you. Whoever you fucking are, and whatever your fucking name is, this is where it finishes for me and you. I walk off, down Knightsbridge, collar up, pissing down with fucking rain. Another point of tension between Noel and Sony was the choice of the first single from the album. Of the complete album they had apparently laid down tracks for in the very first sessions with Death in Vegas in Cornwall, only one completed song had been carried forwards to the final album, and that was track 2, the song Mucky Fingers. And this was the track Noel wanted to be the first single from the new album. In an interview with the NME, he would later say that Liam vetoed this. However, it came out later that it was Sony, not Liam, that had pushed for Lila to be the first single. The band had apparently not even recorded it for the album. It was just an old demo, probably from the Wheeler End sessions. And you can see how late an addition the song was from the fact that they'd already filmed all the segments for the making of the album, and on it there was no mention of the song Lila anywhere. That song must have been added, therefore, right at the last minute. Noel was pushing for the stodgy, repetitive rocker Mucky Fingers to be the first number released from the record. But Sony had other ideas and sent the group back to the studio to record a song they had demoed a year before, which had the potential to sound more like the band had done in their youth and prime. And Sony were right. Lila was 100% the stronger single next to Mucky Fingers. But Noel was not happy at all with the way they had gone about it. And he said this to Nuts magazine in January 2005. The album's finished. We recorded it 3 times. It's been a major pain in the arse, but it's come out really good. We've written 66 songs between the 4 of us, and I think there's 11 or 12 on the album. We were going to do a double album, but we don't want to give Sony too much because it's our last one, so fuck 'em. So you can see, even before Don't Believe the Truth had been released, the decision had been made that Oasis were going to ditch Sony. And by August of that year, they were apparently already out of their contract. That month, Noel said this to the NME. We haven't got a record deal now anyway. We're out of a deal, which is a great position to be in. We don't like to rush things. Be Here Now was rushed. Standing on the Shoulder of Giants was rushed. And it's kind of like, if it takes 5 years for the album to come out, I'm not arsed. When Lila became the lead single from Don't Believe the Truth, Noel dismissed it as annoyingly catchy. But their fans liked the song enough to send it to the top of the charts, vindicating Sony's decision to insist that Oasis re-record it for the album. While the Gallaghers were happy with the success of the single and the sales of the album, they weren't pleased with the intervention from the label and the tensions that had been increasing over the long and difficult gestation period when working on the record. With work finally done on the album, the band had fulfilled their contractual obligations with Sony and decided against renewing the deal, signing instead with rivals Universal in 2007. It had been probably the most tortured, drawn-out production of an album in Oasis's entire career, but when Don't Believe the Truth came out, it was a smash hit. It went to number 1 in the UK, Japan, Italy, Ireland and Argentina, and was widely considered a true return to form. It had been a battle, but the band had, through a long, painful period of trial and error, succeeded in their mission. The goal to replicate Definitely Maybe had been fulfilled in some bizarrely specific ways. Both albums were a mad, cobbled-together patchwork from loads of different recording locations all over the place. Definitely Maybe and Don't Believe the Truth both contained just one track preserved from the very first sessions, exactly as recorded. Slide Away from Definitely Maybe and Mucky Fingers from Don't Believe the Truth. When they went to the very first studio for Definitely Maybe, they were there for around 3 weeks before giving up. And exactly the same for Don't Believe the Truth. Definitely Maybe had a planned first single, Bring It On Down, which ended up getting replaced at the last minute with a much stronger single, Supersonic. Don't Believe the Truth had exactly the same thing with Mucky Fingers and Lila. And what's more, they went into the studio to start work on this bizarrely parallel album on the exact 10-year anniversary of the day they started work on Definitely Maybe. It may have been a battle. They may have travelled halfway around the world to do it, but somehow they had both recreated Definitely Maybe and also rediscovered their fire, creating an album that sounds like nothing else in the Oasis canon, and probably their finest moment of the entire decade. And that's it. A massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, and if you would like access to exclusive bonus material and to be credited at the end of videos, the link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, I'll see you next time.